So let's see if I can now. Oh, I see that one. Okay, so I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners on the lands on which I live and work. And I live on the Woiwurrung Wurundjeri lands of the Eastern Kulin Nation, and RMIT University is also on the Woiwurrung Wurundjeri lands of the Eastern Kulin Nation. So I pay my respects to elders from this very long-standing, incredible society, and acknowledge that First Nations people have this has been a place and a community of learners together, and a place of many political ideas converging with the land, and I pay my respects to that long history. So if I'm just going to alter where you are because you're kind of there we go. So really what the first question is, you know, what kind of things do we think and feel when we first look at children's art? And so I'm kind of starting with the mainstream view, I guess. It's often seen as an object, it's identifiable, we can kind of often spot it if it was to be displayed among other types of visual material. We often have a particular response to that work, particularly if we work in education or we work with young children in other contexts. So the work that we see by young children is often has this affective and semiotic power. We can make assumptions about what those semiotics may be about if we've seen a lot of children's art. So particularly if we're looking at three-dimensional works or if we're looking at flat works, two-dimensional works, it's probably recognizable in some sense. And so there's a kind of an affective power to that work. We build associations around those affective semiotics. So it often informs how we think about the work, but what we think of the work. And so, how, you know, the ways in which we interpret the work, I guess. It also has this affective and semiotic power because it's a memory trigger. Because, of course, you know, we all started young, and many of us do you know, made art or did make you know, kind of visual materials, or had opportunity to make forms or marks or shapes or whatever, even in very different circumstances, you know, where we each grew up. And so this memory trigger kind of feeds back in, it folds back into the work that we look at in a contemporary sense of another child, and it brings that trigger and memory to the fore. And so in that sense, this kind of art object can become attached to a different life, to the one that is not of the child's that made the work, right? Because of this kind of affective semiotic power and its enfolding power in the kind of Deleuzian sense. And so the object is also powerful because it's corporeally imbued. And that can be the memory of holding Play-Doh, for example, or the memory that we may have of a big brush with paint loaded in it, or standing at an easel, or the smell of crayons, or all of those different types of things, right? And so this object becomes, again, through this kind of enfolding, we're kind of interpreting it as an object, but we're also associating it with corporeal corporeal experiences and memories that we've had of our own art making in a similar time. And so the feelings and thoughts all roll together, and they determine our opinions of children's art. And so these things help to kind of assert these particular responses. And for many people, that is a kind of very it's a very pleasant kind of memory, or it's a pleasant set of associations. Hence, this labeling of cuteness for when we see young children's art. So here's an image, and just thinking about what I've spoken about here, what do you think and feel when you look at this art made by young children? These are works that were made by many children, and they were all under 8. I'd just like you to take a minute and think about it and make a note of your initial thoughts and feelings, and try and determine, separate the two things out. And think about what I just spoke about in the first slide. And just make a note of that, because we'll come back to that shortly. So I'm just trying to move the little body of people around my screen. There we go. I'll go to the bottom, I think. It's a bit easier, because otherwise I'm talking through my can't see all my text. So how do we feel when we see children making art? So this is not so much the object, but the act. So we can make assumptions about the art skills children possess. We can think about, particularly, I'm speaking very much here to an informed audience in terms about skills, the things that we learn about children's development, the age and stage, or the socio-cultural, the pathologized, all of those different discourses around childhood growth fuel into our readings of a child's act of making art. So we can become quite assumptive about what's happening, particularly if we've studied the field, and particularly if we read in any of those child development spaces. So we might think about the art skills children possess in terms of providing materials for children's art making. That's when it really comes to the fore, because, for example, if you're setting up art activities for children of a certain age, you will rely on those assumptions about art skills, and a child's ability to use particular materials safely, for example. All of those things, they kind of all sit within that assumption around skill possession. And then we might anticipate the subject matter that they're interested in. We might kind of, again, rely on the things that we've read, the theories, the kind of mainstream ideas, and think about how that really does shape our assumptions and expectations, even about the subject matter that children would be interested in. And it might not be as specific as, oh, it'll be a house, or it'll be a cat, or something like that. But we may make assumptions in terms of children will perhaps reflect their daily activities, or something like that, or they'll relate to things to do with their interpersonal relationships, like with their friends and things. So we can make assumptions also about the motivations for making art. Again, these are very much informed by the mainstream discourses that we read. And so all of those things spark these emotional responses in us, because it's that rights to access, or the kind of social, intellectual benefits of having an art experience, which we draw upon when we have feelings about children's art. And so we might allow those feelings to shape our ideas about why a child is making art and what that art is about. So it starts to funnel and shape into the relationships between the theories and ideas we have read, the things that dominate, the things that are perhaps peripheral, the uncommon ideas about childhood, they actually all feed into our thoughts and ideas about children's art, and they shape our feelings about why art is in the lives of children, or whether it should be, or um, the sadness of it not being, for example. So these feelings can lead us to make assumptions about the value and importance of the art making to the child. So here's another image. You might recognize that's me on the left, and that's my then very young daughter, Hannah. So what do you think is what's the kind of art making that's taking place here? Um, and thinking about the influences of the ways in which we shape our understandings of children's reasons, capacities, um, topics around art making, um, should be the things that you are thinking about as you make some initial interpretations. So I'll just give you a minute to do that. So these are the two images I've shown you are fairly mainstream images. We often see these types of images when we are learning about young children's art making. So the state of things, if you like, is as I've kind of described them in the first four slides, is what led me to kind of really try and articulate how I felt about that through my time working with children, which is very a shockingly 40 years. And so all of that time there's been this kind of very low level resistance to those assumptions and ideas. And the many comments many conversations, many comments, many interpretations that I've heard in that 40 years. And it's really led to the topic of this talk, which is that children's art is not cute. It's not this just cutesy image, which is often kind of instrumentalized, particularly in early childhood. You see any posters, or you see a cover of a book, or you see anything to do with childcare, or and there's you spot it somewhere. There's child art in there somewhere, and so it's kind of it's wielded to bring those affective associative feelings to the fore in people, and so it has this kind of as I say, this kind of affective and semiotic power, but it's not really what it's about. It's not very accurate in terms of what's going on. So how we think and feel about children's art can result in these projected interpretations and assigned meanings. But we can seek out evidence of a theory, um, and in that we often don't take notice of all the details. So what we are looking for is clues of a child demonstrating the theory of X or Y, and so we seek out momentary elements of the work, because it gives us the theory that we hope is true. And so an example of that would be, again, with my own child who did an awful lot of drawing with me at home. I remember the excitement of one of her childcare educators saying that she had finally drawn the mandala figure. Um, and um, and then her face didn't know what to do, because she could see how disappointed I was. And They were waiting for this kind of symbol to work, this schematic to emerge, to evidence the development theories, the Gardner theories of scribbling to profile drawing. And so it was the kind of seeking out of evidence of the theory, when in fact, at the time, she was doing the most incredible gestural mark making, because I was doing a lot of it with her at the same time. And because of that close uh, relationship with her as she and I worked together, this was like this kind of this secondary thing that was of no consequence really to what she was doing otherwise, but it was evidence of the theory. And so it reassured the educator that she was in fact developing okay, because she had drawn this kind of mandala figure with the arms coming out the side of the head and all of that stuff. And so when we seek out the theory, we ignore the other stuff, right? And so this can lead us to offer children art making activities that are devoid of purpose or content. And so this is the issue when we think of art being cute. It's all of those kind of associative the associative things that it stands for, the things that it represents in terms of our other understandings of childhood. And so the importance of dropping this label is that we then start to look and listen and learn properly about what children are doing when they are making their artwork. So let's look again. The one on the left, the one that's Hannah and I don't know what you thought, and you know, in the Q&A we can revisit this and people can let me know. But in fact, this was a drawing, part of the Big Draw Festival that was in Canberra at the time. And the Big Draw Festival is about people coming together to draw for the sake of keeping drawing as a thriving practice. And so this was at the National Portrait Gallery. It was, we were here, but with adult artists, we were with performers, we were with kind of movement works, and both of us were drawing alongside each other, interpreting all of this, this kind of drawing provocation, if you like. And so it wasn't, I don't know whether you assumed it was a drawing lesson for children or that we had just plonked ourselves on the ground in the middle of the busy Saturday or something. But it was an adult's kind of workshop that she came to, and other people had brought their children along, and it was a kind of intergenerational experience that wasn't modified for young children. And so this was us all being treated as drawing artists and working with the provocations. And the one on my right, which is the color bands, these I will talk about shortly. But these were about a really difficult period of Brisbane's history. And so these were young children living in Brisbane, in Queensland, in Australia, and creating works around a really catastrophic weather event. And so I don't know what you may have thought about these works, but these were children who were trying to process something that had been extremely destructive in the town. And they were using color and form to kind of process how this event had affected them and their lives and their families. So yeah, not always what we assume it to be. So in my abstract, I talked about the kind of diverse lives that children have. And although young children can have many similar kind of components to life, if you like, which might include learning to live with other siblings, maybe learning to eat solid food, learning to walk, learning to talk, and all those types of things. There are also vast differences because of the ways that we as humans live in different ways across the world. And that feeds in to all of the provocations, the processes, the reasons, the audiences, the presentations through which art is made. And so in my experience, what I've seen is evidence of the headings that I'm going to talk about. Um, and that's these kind of ways that they make their work not just about, but what they want their work to do, what they want in terms of um, the working out of life, you know, so how it helps them understand life perhaps better, how it how it kind of contributes to the understandings or the kind of ways in which life may change through this process of making work. So it's how the act of making work, maybe alone or with others, kind of formulates some of these mysteries into better understandings for themselves, and perhaps for others looking at their work as well, and perhaps others making work with them. And so relationality is one thing that I've seen emerge many times in children's work. So from this point on, there'll be no more text. I'm just going to show images of works that I've done with children over that 40 years, and how when I look at this work, it's a memory trigger for me of the time of working with the children and the incredible power of this work in being able to place me back there and provoke my memories of what was happening, and to enable me to kind of talk about this as if it was only recently done. And so this kind of transcending of the time frame is aided by the work, but it also makes it well, conversely, the distance in time, the stretch of time allows me to um, think more deeply about the work, because I've had time to kind of process um, this experience with all the others that I've had in the time. And so this work was part of a very large project I did on collaborative drawing. I've published a few papers on intergenerational collaborative drawing, and it was a project I did to think about modes of communication and what is missed often between uh, children and children, but also children and adults, if adults aren't really familiar with the kind of modes of communication that are happening within visual. I looked at visual art and obviously drawing in particular, and the fact that because many adults stop drawing, it's almost like a language is lost. And so children's, particularly young children, often rely on drawing as a mode of communication, and yet the adult, often who might be their educator, because they've stopped drawing, they don't speak that language, and so there's a kind of disconnect and a mistranslation. And so this project explored the benefits, but also the kind of affordances, if you like, of making work together, and to explore what that brought for both the adults and the children in terms of communications. And so relationality with the world and with others in the world is a really core concern, I think, of children's art. And I think it's something they really work hard with in terms of a concept, and all their questions and their uncertainties and their their kind of frustrations or curiosities, all the things that we have, those thoughts and ideas that we have when we are not quite sure or learning, how this pours into the work that is created, and how this gets completely missed when you just look at this as an image and just go, what's going on? What's this about? Oh, I think I can see and so, we start to look for the schema. And in fact, there might not be any schema there. So, it's when we don't speak that language, how much we miss. Um, and whether, if the cuteness label is the label of authenticity, then this work might have gone in the bin because it might have been judged as, just messy and not colourful, and it doesn't tell me anything. I can't see any recognizable things in there. So therefore, this is not a real work. And yet, this was a really intense exercise in a group of children and their teacher working through ideas and conversations together and steadily layering um, ink over ink over ink and telling this amazing kind of account and story and relating to each other in the process. And of course, we know that the finished item, which is often on a piece of paper when we're talking about drawing, is a really kind of thin shadow of the whole event of drawing. It is a very poor record in the end of what actually was happening in the drawing event. And so, as an artist who draws, I know that. And that's what I wanted to bring into this project to help educators who were no longer drawing to kind of remember that from their own childhood, because they were drawing with children who were actually using that process. So relationality is something that is really important in children's work. In these images here, these are projects that I did in the 90s in the UK. And in terms of art being a process through which children think about their relationships to place and think about their relationships to their own identity and also to their community, um, and how they kind of think and feel about that. So these are images that I did. Sorry, these are images of projects that I did in the UK, where children were in very mixed communities, and were also kind of establishing themselves as young people, as citizens in their own right, and how all this kind of feels for them on a daily basis. And so the child hauling the rag out the bucket was part of a printmaking project, a traveling printmaking project that I took in a big van all around my county. And children did different types of prints on their area and how they feel about being in the area. And the one on my right is of the group of children wanting to beautify their area through mosaics, and also kind of thinking about the cultural expectations, the cultural not rules, but the kind of ways of working with art that were culturally respectful, and how we could make images and installations that would be appropriate culturally, right? And so this is children working through all these really complex relationships in their art making. So it isn't just them bashing out a print or sticking the mosaic tiles down and making a pattern, right? Um, Similarly with these ones, so these are still on relationality and how we, when we give children an opportunity to explore materials, to explore working differently with materials, they will kind of push what kind of aesthetics, what kind of corporeal activities, what kind of ways of working with tools can be possible when the context is rich enough for it. So the image on the right of the boy on his hands was a project in New Zealand that I did, and this was about how young children become members of the city, how they feel at home in the city, and young children need to be physically engaged in space to feel connected to it. And so this was a project that brought in dance and drawing. And the children actually, we allowed them to use the big chalks. And the child here has actually got chalks rammed between his toes and is making marks on the wall. And they're using great big paintbrushes with water. And because everything has to disappear at the end, obviously. And this is about them feeling agentic in the city. And so these gestures are not so much marks of representation, they're marks of occupation and they're tracings of I was here, right? And so this is a presence making as an active citizen in an urban space. We then move on to ethics. And, we often I'm saying we. I'm not necessarily referring to everyone in this room. It is a kind of, more broader we. But there can be this kind of a assumption that children don't understand about right or wrong, or they don't have an ethical framework that is already there. It is often felt that adults need to explain it to them. But actually, in my experience, the idea of ethics is really welded in a very early age. And children can demonstrate in many ways, not just through art, they can demonstrate their ethical frameworks very effectively. And so when I think about the work that I've seen, it has been very ethically motivated. It is very concerned with ideas of fairness or ideas of conflict or ideas of inclusion um, or possibilities being honored, or imaginations. All of those different things have this kind of ethical basis to them. And so children's work can really, it can really think about that very carefully. So these images and the one previous are from something called the Children's Sensorium that I did here in Melbourne. And I worked with colleagues at RMIT, and this was a project called The Future of Play that was run by Larissa Horth, a colleague of mine. And children came into this amazingly designed exhibition that was curated by Grace McQuilton, and it was in RMIT. And in this particular workshop, I did my mapping work with young children, and the timing of this was just after our lockdown release. And Melbourne had a very, very long lockdowns in the pandemic, and it really affected, as you would imagine, the young children who had been born into the pandemic, but also children who had been very young at the start of the pandemic and our lockdowns, which lasted over 2 years. And in that growth period, they had never been to school. They were perhaps in that 2 years, they should have started school, but they hadn't managed to because of lockdowns, etc. And so we had this series of workshops alongside the exhibition that brought children into the space to think about anxiety and their feelings about the world in this really difficult time. And so one of the things I do with young children is to get them to map all over me. And it's a really interesting experience. They feel very, very nervous at first because that you're not supposed to draw on people. But when I give them absolute assurance it's fine, they go to town. And it's a really lovely way of thinking ethically about relationships and tracing the world around them. You can see here they're tracing the shadows that are falling across my body on the hazmat suit. And so ethics is it's a big driver of children's work. We also think about speculative possibilities, and this is, not just about experimenting with materials. It's about thinking with and through materials, and also allowing that kind of combination to spark imaginative ideas about the world. And so this is really prominent in my mind, that children think about speculative possibilities. We know that children draw things about imaginary or possible worlds, or they imagine different versions of something that's mundane, like a 6-story car, or toys being able to speak. We know that children have this very grand focus on speculative possibilities, and they should be taken seriously. It's not the kind of it's not the cuteness of childhood, right? It's how we become researchers. It's how we become kind of interested in custodianship of the land. It's how we become uh, social citizens, in terms of wanting fairness or wanting something that is better. We engage in these speculative possibilities. It's incredibly important that children have this recognized in their work. And it happens in different ways. So in these images, you can see there's a drama-based work going on with this is a pre-service teacher dressed as a crocodile, I think, and a young child interacting through animal stories. But the one on the right is really interesting to me, which is the speculative possibilities that emerge through abstraction. And the abstraction creates a need for kind of gesture, corporal response, just working with materials in terms of the possibilities of the materials. There is no imagery going on here in terms of a picture of something. And so limiting the experience to a picture cuts out all of that speculative opportunity. This child is not making a mess. They are working intently with the color and the form and the ways in which the paint behaves vertically as well, and how that is forcing them to move their body in particular ways to make the paint move around. It's a really intense expression of speculation there. And then I obviously work in the digital space, as you heard at the beginning. So one of the projects I did was working at the New Media Festival, Ars Electronica, which goes on in Linz in Austria. And working with children's understandings of like coding and algorithm, but also not just that as a system, but how machines might think of us first. So what kind of person do they think we are, and how does that shape what they are? So it's the kind of ethics of AI and the ethics of programming code. So we got children to think about all of these things and what kind of codings they would put into an algorithm to make sure that they, as a person, and what they are interested in could be recognized by the AI tool, right? And so we had a series of both hand drawn workshops, but the one with the children in is it uses bare conductive and Arduinos. And the shapes actually, when they're touching this dark paint, because it creates sound. And so the bare conductive is a paint. You can screen print it, or you can stitch it on, stick it. It's like a tape as well, and it carries electric current, and it allows programmed sounds to happen. It's very exciting for children to have that kind of this kind of digital speculative play. And so ecologies is where I talk about that slide with the bands of color. So children are in the world, and they are not immune to what's happening So that image and this one relates to a program called Out of the Box, which is the Southern Hemisphere's biggest festival for children under 8, and it happens in Brisbane. And I was commissioned over its a period of its time. It happens every 2 years, and I was commissioned by QPAC, who host the festival, to curate spaces within the festival. And in this one, we looked at the then recent Brisbane flood, and it had kind of inundated the city of Brisbane. And many people had lost their homes. Luckily, we didn't have many deaths, minimal deaths, because it's not like a tidal thing in terms of a sweeping tide. It just rises, but it doesn't stop rising. But it's a slow rise, and so people had time to get out the way. But their homes were absolutely flooded. And so the room over the festival of 8 days, the room was virtually flooded, and then the water receded, and children came in each day and did installation works based on the water level as it rose and as it receded, to allow them to process how they felt about this experience. And so you can see here some of the works that they created with the pre-service teachers in the 8-day festival. And so groups of my students devised activities and workshops based on the 8 days and the rising and the falling waterline. And of course, on the right, you can see the mud that was left, and which is a factor of floods. I know in the US you've suffered terribly from them very recently and horrifically, and would know this scenario very well. But it allowed these very young children to find ways of processing and working through some of the things that they'd felt and seen and heard, experienced, all of those things. There's Katie, I saw, is here. So this is something I've done with Katie, who is here in Melbourne. And so these are children. I won't mention the name of the place, but these are children who are interested in coming to RMIT up at Bandora, which is has this beautiful kind of water ecology, and thinking about the kind of more than human world. And so you can see I've got my mapping suit on, and the children, you can just glimpse that they have bits of tape around them, and they have paper that they are also mapping onto themselves. And drawing became a process of marking and inscribing the world in all of its movement. And so ecologies is about the child dissipating itself from the center of the world and becoming a part of a bigger network of things. And art processes really help that happen, particularly for young children who can struggle with that concept of being just one person amongst many and one being amongst a whole living ecosystem. And so as part of the process, these children again were able to map the ecology over my body. And this was what this does is it shifts the power relationship between the adult and the child. And children have a different way of relating with mark making, surfaces, but they're also very conscious of me as a person in there. They're very respectful, I have to say, and they really paid attention to what was around them because of this kind of unusual context of making work together. And then this beautiful drawing is of rain, and it's just astounding. I just love this drawing. This is about looking at rain in its direction and its minute formation. And it just, for me, this was made by a 4-year-old child. And for me, this just shows the capacity for children to understand the larger ecologies around them. and to really pay attention to the world, and that it's an extraordinary thing that we can miss if we expect art and children's work to always appear in certain ways. This is an incredible ecology drawing, in my opinion. I've kept this one for many years because it is a real favorite. It has lots going on in it. Oops, sorry. Let me just. And then very quickly, belonging. I have lots of images of children kind of creating work about their neighborhood and their abilities to kind of create a community through the work that they are doing. And so these are images, again, you can see they're pretty old now, and they are of places in and around my hometown in Leicestershire in the UK, and doing work with children who live in very tiny villages around in the outer areas of the county, and how those villages have a kind of long history of being there. And the traditions that they've had through their long time frame are things that local children know about, and they are passed on. And so this idea of belonging through celebrating their kind of unique nature of their home is really important for children as well. And often that's done through collaborative work. So here you've got a mural being painted. This child is one of many who was actually there, and three children in an infant school contributing to this very large textile banner, which celebrates the kind of different festivals of the local area. And so belonging is something that children do and really enjoy being part of. And again, this is the same kind of area and the same time period. And these are the kind of ways in which traditions are maintained in those kind of rural areas in Britain, which is through like the May Day festival and things like that. And so the children having parades and forming this sense of celebration with each other, but as part of their bigger community is really important. Um, I don't need to tell you how important coming together as as a community is in these times, and through these kind of really uh, these kind of simple forms, which really just use paper and glue and some bamboo sticks, and can be really effective. And children kind of they get that. They get the importance and the value of that. And so it's the joy of parading, but it's the joy of working on something which has a kind of parading element to it. So these works are to be paraded, and they are to be held up, and they are to be twirled, and it's the whole kind of effective practice of that. And then just finally is aesthetics. And of course, we think that children don't understand about aesthetics. What I found by doing digital work with children is the affordances of the technology massively surprised me in terms of what I saw children able to demonstrate, because they weren't the frustration of not being able to use a pencil or convey what's in your head is somewhat mitigated with digital technology. And so the playing around with these forms, these digital apps. But actually, what most surprised me was when we gave children iPads, was their oh, hang on, I'll just go forward. Is this one? Is the photography? Um, these were 3-year-olds. Their capacity to understand aesthetics, composition, form, color is I was surprised. I was really surprised when I saw what they noticed. It's very difficult for them to convey that in handmade way because it falls short for them because they're learning how to control their hands and their arm and their gestures and things like that. And so that's why we sometimes giving children cameras and digital technologies brings it lessens that gap between kind of intention and expression. And the kind of just the sophistication of these two images is quite breathtaking. And so yeah, it's really important, I think. And I'll just flick through these. So these are more of the mapping ones. I realize I'm out of time now. So, but the aesthetics of working with gestural marks. This is in a special school. I do a lot of work with children with different abilities. And this is a project I did with Melbourne Special Schools with children you can see they're older children, um, many of them non-verbal, just a fantastic way through the mapping for them to kind of create gestural responses to the world. We had such a great way of working with the children with their kind of linear aesthetic capacities. And these are just some of the works. I think that is the last slide. This one is the one that's the last slide. And I just want to finish on this one because children will tell you when they feel that you get it, right? So in this image, I think this is my best ever feedback. So it was my dream was to fly like a bird, and it happened today, which was they gave me this beautiful feedback after some work that I did with them in a festival. I don't think I've ever had any other student feedback that's been that good, really. So and I think that's it. So yes.